Hey guys, it's Loud Guys. Today we are going to watch US Army deploys Typhoon missiles in the range of China. So this is a big thing because near China even India is there. So can this be a problem for India too because it's in the range of China, and where is it deployed? So let's watch the
video.
The US Army's brand new Typhon launcher hasn't been in operational use for more than a year, and yet it's so powerful that it's already been at the center of a major international geopolitical crisis. Normally, you need to be an F-35 or a Patriot missile system to be at the center of such international intrigue. The whole controversy started in April 2024, when a battery of these launchers were forward deployed to Luzon in the Philippines. It was their first ever major test to see how they might actually work in the field at the annual Balikatan joint military exercise between the United States and the Filipino Armed Forces. You see, the Typhon launcher is central to the US military's evolving strategy to counter rival adversaries, which is diplomatic speak for Russia and China. And so confirming that it could actually be supported anywhere in the world is key to deterrence. So these Typhon launchers were loaded up on a C-17 at Joint Base Lewis McChord, then flown 8,000 miles to the Philippines. This was important because using a prototype Typhon launcher in a dry desert in the western Nevada on home turf is far more simple than trying to do it on a humid beachfront thousands of miles away. But surprisingly, this isn't even what caused the international snafu. What happened was a month later, after the training exercise was all packed up and finished, the US military just left the Typhon launchers behind. I don't think you accidentally forget a new sensitive item that's multi-billion dollars worth of weapons.
It was done on purpose.
It's not like that time my buddy left his rifle in the woods and forced the entire unit to get online and search from the forest on their hands and knees for the weapon. This caused a huge spike in tension between the United States and China because the Typhon launcher allegedly worked too well, and that meant that it disrupted the balance of power in the region. The US Army hadn't even live fired them like how China regularly live fires missiles over Taiwan. China obviously wasn't a huge fan of this move, and so they complained with strongly worded language. Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jun warned that the deployment of this Typhon system was, quote, severely damaging regional security and stability, end quote. Meanwhile, the Filipino Armed Forces insisted it was China who was severely damaging regional security by sending their navy to shoot water cannons and harass their boats. Either way, the two nations have increasingly been butting heads in the air and in the sea over contested islands off their shores, and personally I think that that's part of the whole reason why the United States military left these systems there. A few months later, in July 2024, the United States finally announced they would withdraw the Typhon launchers and bring them back home. And we all lived happily ever after, and China ended up being the United States' best man at its wedding. And the two look back and laugh about the whole thing now. Except that isn't at all what happened, because by late September 2024, it was revealed that the Typhon launchers were still on the ground in the Philippines. They hadn't been removed. The news agency Reuters confirmed that they saw the Typhon launchers still stationed in the northern part of the country closest to China. Take a look at these Planet Labs satellite images that reveals that the launchers are still stationed at Leong International Airport.
How far is it from India?
Probably the single most important part of the United States strategy in Asia is pre-positioning strategic weapon systems to already be there before war even kicks off. This is because it would take valuable weeks to fly the Typhon launcher, its crew, ammo, and the whole logistical tail into place and then set up and start firing. That's why the Philippines is an invaluable staging point if China were to ever attack Taiwan. Typhon launchers are basically the Army's way of saying, hey China, it's a nice network of anti-air batteries you got there. Would be a shame if someone cruise missiled it. A senior government official spoke to Reuters and gave them some insight into what's happening, saying, quote, if ever it will be pulled out, it is because the objective has been achieved. We want to give them sleepless nights.
We want to give them sleepless
nights. If you really wanted to give China sleepless nights, all you had to do was send them a bunch of My Pillows. So if I were to put two and two together, it sounds to me like the United States is using these Typhon launchers in the Philippines as a leverage to try to get China to stop aggressive actions that they're taking against the Filipinos. Further evidence of this comes from the fact that the Filipino government is even trying to purchase the system from the United States so they can keep this capability there in their homeland. There are even reports that the United States military is now thinking of deploying the Typhon launcher to Japan in the near future. The reason is because the U.S. Secretary of the Army, Christine Wormuth, said, quote, and so to your question about where might they be stationed eventually, I do think that in the theory of multi-domain task force could have great utility if it were stationed in Japan, for example, or perhaps in Australia. But first and foremost, Japan, end quote. So one thing I think to look for in the coming months and years is for signs of the US trying different tactics to get them to Pacific, whether it's letting them fall off the back of a truck in the Philippines or selling them on Facebook Marketplace to anyone in Japan who wants to hold on to them. But what is it about these new weapon systems that makes all the allies want it and it's getting Chinese Communist Party all hot and bothered? It's because it can strike between 500 and 1,800 kilometers.
Oh, India is
the distance
close.
from the Philippines to mainland China is about 750 kilometers, while the distance to the Taiwan Strait is roughly 650 kilometers. Have you ever had a pesky target that you really needed to hit, but it was too far away for your ATACMS missile, and you're trying to save your stockpile of long-range hypersonic ammo for a special once-in-a-lifetime high-value enemy? That's what the U.S. Army's new Typhon missile launcher is for. It's the Goldilocks of missiles. Each Typhon battery consists of 4 launchers called payload deployment systems. Each has 4 cells. This gives them 16 total rounds at the ready, which can be a mixture of your Tomahawk and SM-6 missiles at once. You also need to bring along the BOC, the Battery Operations Center, which is basically a shipping container with air conditioning and internet access where all the actual controls are contained. Don't even ask me what they're doing over at the Command Operations Center. Each battery will receive a reload trailer and support truck to keep operations running smoothly. They remind me of the mobile classrooms that my public elementary school bought to handle the overflow of extra kids. Except the Typhon launchers teach actually unforgettable lessons. Given that they can fire so far, you can't just rely on some high-speed artillery spotters to see the target for the Typhon. Instead, you'll use a system called the Extended Range Sensing and Effects, or ERSE as the company calls it. Let's call it that too because I can only fit so many military-industrial complex buzzwords into my mouth at one time before I start to gag. My old squad leader used to always tell me that I had a very sensitive gag reflex. These new formations combine drones, spy aircraft, and real-time satellite imagery in order to identify targets on the ground. They even have a dedicated surveillance balloon section. I want to see what that unit patch looks like. All these create what's called a kill web, with hundreds of different types of sensors communicating with each other at different altitudes in order to find, track, and kill those targets. In operation, the ESER company would send out dozens of intel assets prior to a large-scale movement of friendly forces, finding targets that could do some long-range damage to our troops on the ground, and sending that info to the, you guessed it, Battery Operations Center, the BOC. Ballistic launch points are pretty easy to spot once they get firing, so the ability to fold everything back into a Hemet trailer and gun it down the road is one of the main appeals of this system. Well, that and shooting Tomahawks. Once the initial breakthrough is made against a defensive barrier, then the Typhon launcher can be put to work maneuvering forward with the rest of the formation. It's a multi-domain weapon system, which means it can engage enemy ships in the sea, aircraft in the sky, command outposts on the land, and critical infrastructure from a distance. And here, this is what's really key, I think, is it does this without relying on air superiority to do these things like the United States military did in the past. Air superiority is like having a nice safety net. It feels great when it's there, but you better learn how to fight like hell when it's not. But there's actually a lot more to this launcher than you might think.
It's very difficult to fight without it.
First, we need to address the elephant in the room, because I know what you're thinking, and I was thinking the same thing. Cappy, are you sure it's actually called the Typhon and not the Typhoon launcher? Fair question. I've been known to mispronounce a name or two in my day, and admittedly I've gotten confused before in the past and called it Typhoon launchers in previous episodes. But this launcher isn't named after a strange word for a hurricane. It gets its name from the Typhon monster from Greek mythology, which was described as being a giant dragon with 100 heads and snakes for legs, which if you ask me is way cooler than a big storm, but that's just me. These launchers at their core are platforms for yeeting missiles off of a truck. And the major change here is that up until now, that could only be done when it was fired from the Navy's fleet of ships. Naval fire is great, but it requires a ton of joint service coordination, isn't super reactive to changing situations on the ground, and they're usually limited to targets closer to the shoreline. Not to mention that giant boats in the middle of the ocean can make pretty big targets. The design of the Typhon started around 2020, and it came out of the Army's $404 million mid-range fire systems program. According to a congressional report from April of 2024, the Typhon program started after it was determined that, quote, reported improvements to Russian and Chinese artillery systems present a challenge to the U.S. Army, end quote. The U.S. had munitions that would be able to take out these targets, but they were sitting in the Navy and the Air Force stockpiles, and that wasn't good enough for the Army. 2 missiles were selected for testing, the infamous Tomahawk cruise missile and the SM-6, also known as the RIM-174, in use by the Navy. In fact, you might recognize the Typhon because it's sort of a ground-modified Lockheed Mark 70 Mod 1. The Mark 70 Mod 1 takes missile tubes found on Navy ships and crams them into a standard shipping container, so you can slap them just about anywhere. This is why the Army was able to deploy these things so quickly. According to Lieutenant General Robert Rash, a senior officer at the Rapid Capabilities and Critical Technologies Office, the Typhon, quote, progressed from a blank piece of paper in July of 2022 to the soldiers' hands in just over 2 years.
2 years?
So soldiers can begin training as quickly as possible, end quote. The first 4 prototypes were delivered by Lockheed in late 2022, and by June of 2023, the Army had successfully completed a test fire with the Tomahawk missile out of the new launcher, declaring it fully operational less than 3 years after being dreamed up. For reference, the development of the Pizza MRE took over 10 years, although as an Italian, I can confidently say it ended up tasting like a war crime. The 2 missiles being used, the Tomahawk and the SM-6, have ranges of about 1,000 miles and 310 miles respectively. But the important question is what kind of firepower is being packed into those bad boys. Tomahawks typically have a payload capacity of 1,000 pounds, but have a couple of different variants that they'd be using. The SM-6 is a bit more interesting of the two because it can be used for a different number of target categories than just targets on the ground. These are about as close to an anti-everything missile that the DoD has in its stockpile. Originally designed for longer-range anti-air targets, like planes and helicopters, it can take out anything from drones to incoming ballistic missiles, and even naval ships as a secondary role. Similar to the Tomahawk, but at much higher speeds and with a smaller warhead of only about 140 pounds. So the Tomahawks are meant for the larger, generally stationary targets, think of your buildings or large fortifications, and the SM-6 for smaller targets of opportunity, like mobile command posts or high payoff targets like missile emplacements. The SM-6, the U.S. Army just decided to start producing 500 of these a year.
500
and the latest version of these,
year.
the SM-6 Block 1B, are hypersonic versions, meaning they can push over 5 times the speed of sound. One of the main reasons the US Army hasn't had this capability until now was because the kind of weapon system was literally illegal. In 1987, the United States and the Soviet Union signed the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces, or the INF Treaty. This banned the designing or possession of land-based missiles that had a range of 500 to 5,500 kilometers. In 2019, after seeing Russia literally could not be bothered to follow the agreement since they were developing their own ballistic missile arsenal and China never even signed on to it, the United States decided, you know what? We're pulling out of this treaty. This had the collective effect of making every defense company start drooling when they read that headline. So how does this stack up to Russia and Chinese equivalents? Russia has been fielding its medium-range ballistic missile, the Iskander, since 2006, but we haven't really seen them in full operational scale use until the war in Ukraine kicked off, and then we started seeing them being used. These hypersonic missiles have a range of about 500 kilometers, and it has a 1,700-pound warhead. After a few months into the war, Ukraine had begun developing successful strategies to intercept them, forcing them to start firing twice as many missiles in the hopes that one would pass through. These lack the pinpoint accuracy of the RM-6 or the Tomahawk, hence the need for a heavier payload capacity, because Iskanders are said to hit within 50 meters of your point of aim, whereas the Tomahawk can hit within 10 meters. Point is, the Russian Iskander is a formidable weapon system, but only insofar as Ukraine lacks the ability to shoot them down. However, China's ballistic missile arsenal is a bit more robust. China's equivalent medium-range ballistic missile is the Dongfang 21C. It's been in service since 2006. These have a long range at an estimated 1,100 miles, but they have pretty awful accuracy. And so on average, it'll be off anywhere between 50 and 100 meters. I may not have shot expert back in the day, but at least I didn't miss by a literal football field length and distance. They also have one major disadvantage. They can only be fired from prepared hard surfaces like a road or specially built launch pads. This is because the backblast from the missiles sends dirt and debris flying out so fast that it'll literally kill anyone around it. Firing this thing from a gravel patch would be like setting off a giant frag grenade. This means that anyone with access to Google Maps on their phone could spend a few hours and identify literally every spot that this thing could be fired from. The DoD needs to hire one of those GeoGuessr guys, and it would probably take all of 10 minutes. The US Army is revolutionizing how they fight by organizing into 5 multi-domain task force, 3 of which will be deployed to the Pacific, and a key part of this new unit will be the Typhon launchers, which tells me that one way or another, the United States is going to deploy these things to the Pacific, although, like how I mentioned earlier, we don't know exactly where in the Pacific yet. All of the stuff that goes kaboom will be found in the Strategic Fires Battalion, which will consist of a HIMARS battery for those shorter ranges, an MRC battery where the Typhon will live for medium range, and then you got the long range hypersonic weapon battery for those tough to reach spots. The Army is currently requesting $183 million in research and development funds and $233 million in acquisition in order to continue testing the Typhon and building up batteries inside the multi-domain task force. So far, testing has been so successful that plans are already set to have 5 batteries fully operational by 2028. Wow. And signs are pointing that the Fires Battalion will increase the number of Typhon batteries to 2 or 3 each.
So the danger is kind of over. I thought that it was in the range of Indian peninsula also, but no, it is not. It is a bit far away, and it is majorly focused on China, because normally India and US are allies, so that is why it is not pointed anywhere near to India. Because normally what like US does is US normally targets an area that okay, this area is covered by me, this area is covered, and India is an area that is not covered by USA, because like India has not given permission, and also like nearby places are also China and Pakistan, so they cannot keep their weapons there also. So but yes, US's main focus is on China only.
Definitely. And I like this thing about the USA, that they are very rapid with their weapons. Like in 2 to 3 years they were ready with their weapon, and also they are spending a lot of money on the research, because it just shows that how dedicated they are towards the nation. That is a really good thing,
actually. So what do you guys think about it? Do let us know in the comment section below. So do like, share and
subscribe.
Bye.